Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist congregation of Terre, Haute. This congregation welcomes all people, regardless of their age, religion, race, nationality, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or anything else that has been used to divide people. We are a group of people with our own opinions, our own ideas, our own dreams, but we share ideals. We share a common belief in a liberal religion. In our discussions, we may disagree with each other, but we must always remember that what unites us is stronger than what separates us. We must always end the service aware of the love that we have for each other.
On being you, we reflect on the fifth principle. In our religious lives, the democratic process requires trust in the development of each individual conscience, a belief that such development is possible for each of us, as well as a commitment to cultivate our own conscience. We would call it a commitment to the value of each person. In the words of Theodore Parker, democracy means not I am as good as you are, but you are as good as I am. My connection with the sacred is only as precious as my willingness to acknowledge the same connection in others. Reverend Parisa Parsa, Executive Director of the Reverend Parisa Parsa, Executive Director of the Public Conversations Project. Number 601, When all the people of the world love, then the strong will not overpower the weak, the many will not oppress the few, the wealthy will not mock the poor, the honored will not disdain the humble, the cunning will not deceive the simple. See. Opening hymn number 138, These Things Shall Be.
These things shall be a loftier race than e'er the world hath known shall rise, with flame of freedom in their souls and light of science in their eyes. Nation with nation, land with land, unarmed shall live as comrades free.
number 683, be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space. Its shrine, the good heart. Its creed, all truth. Its ritual, works of love. Its profession of faith, divine living. Theodore Parker. Today's message will be given by Sam Martland, who we have been thankful enough to have in our congregation for quite some time now. He's past president of the board.
I really am talking today as an expert on historians, which I feel more or less qualified to do because I know a few. Because half of my graduate school class married each other, and that's the only people I ever talked to, really. So I am a historian and a history professor, and there have probably been times when I clarified that I was a professor rather than a teacher, where people thought I was being snooty, but really I was being deferential, because I've never been in a situation where I was also supposed to maintain discipline, where anybody cared if I kept attendance correctly, and where the students would do anything other than fall asleep if I didn't sort of perform correctly. And the thing that makes an academic historian in particular is that we're the people who went to a particular sort of occasionally dull school to learn how to find new history of old things. As, for example, in the top left corner in the reading room of the National Archives in Silver Spring, which is where they keep all the records that the tourists don't want to see. Shelves go on for miles, and it doesn't really show very well in this picture, the most gorgeous natural light. It's a 9-story window, and on each balcony is a different kind of, like I think the 5th balcony is where they play the Nixon tapes. And so that's one part of the job. And there's actually, the background is a Chilean government document, which I've spent so much of my life reading. And of course, I spend a certain amount of time teaching. That's what I'm actually paid for. I like to say I'm paid for the grading because I would talk for free. And there we are in the pandemic having a midterm exam on the stage of Hatfield Hall at Rose-Hulman where the concerts are because they wanted a bigger room. And that piano that you can sort of see on the left was my lectern, with the back to the house, sort of back to the auditorium. And of course, we'll sometimes go to conferences there. I've finally gone to Princeton, to the Urban History Association, which will become relevant. Remember that I like to go to the Urban History Association, because it's going to come back. And one of the things that makes college history professors different from high school teachers is that by and large, outside of Florida, we're in charge of what we teach. And are allowed to say more or less whatever we consider to be true, and whatever some politicians might think are not there to make people feel either good or bad about a particular version of the past. And that I've wrestled for a long time with the idea of whether my classes were college level, because nobody ever taught me what that meant. It might have been helpful. But what I've eventually come up to is that I am trying to get across what it is like to find history, rather than a list of stuff you could look up in Wikipedia, which is kind of my opinion of a lot of the big overpriced textbooks, is that they are what you could find in Wikipedia for $185 with a bunch of unnecessary pictures and questions. So I like to think, even though probably professionally at a conference they'd say this isn't what we're working for, that it would be nice to have a loftier race than e'er the world has known. Just for a little comment on that, not that hymn text, but that hymn tune, I think, was one of the 3 hymns the first day I ever went to church at a Unitarian church, which will also come back later on. It was with the "O life that maketh all things new." Okay, we can look at number 3 here. Number 3 is a monument, and it's totally not what you expected, I'm sure. This is one of 5,528 monuments that mark the border between Canada and the United States. We are standing 2 feet into Stansted, Quebec, and the portable generator or whatever it is in the back there is about 10 feet into Derbyline, Vermont. And the poor house there is built over the border, and if you live on the side of the house where your doors open into the US, you have one set of power lines and one set of bills and one set of passports, and if you live on the bottom floor and the door opens the other way, then the effective border is horizontal between you, and you live in Canada. And there's a bunch of houses like that in this town from back when the US and Canada didn't find it necessary to actually patrol the border, except for the smuggling of whiskey in whichever direction the taxes happened to be favorable for at the time. Or the smuggling, actually, there's a lot of counterfeit banknotes smuggled through there in the 1830s and 40s. And in the town of Sherbrooke, there was a whole street of people who made fake American banknotes. You could order them in catalogs. The wonderful things you learn when you tell your students to write a paper about anything that interests them, and you find out all this cool stuff. This is a monument which, if it were to be taken down, would cause problems, because the actual definition of the border with Canada isn't, well, it's certainly not the 49th parallel there, because it wouldn't be close, but even out in the west where it's the 49th parallel, no, the definition of the border is the collection of line segments that link all the monuments, because they know they're not exactly right. But they went along, as countries do, and set the border between them, like Robert Frost in the poem Fixing the Wall, you know, and it's a thing they do. And so you need that. If you moved it, you would screw things up. You'd wreck the tax base on one side or the other. Somebody would suddenly have crossed the border without a passport, and so on. There would be problems. And I think, I don't usually make biblical references, but I believe there are nasty punishments reserved in Leviticus or similar for people who move other people's landmarks, meaning things like that. As a particularly Western society, we're very territorial. Okay, let's look at number 4. This is the kind of monument you imagined, if you thought about it at all. We all know this one. It was Bobby Lee in Charlottesburg, and he's not there anymore. Now, I'm distantly related to General Sherman, so I take somewhat exception to statues of the traitor generals, but that's not really my point here. There are a lot of these around, and I think 2 overall points here are, 1, monuments are for the people who put them up, and they affect the people who have to look at them, and they do nothing for the people that they're to, except in the rare case where you put them up to somebody who's still alive, which is a stupid idea for reasons I could go into in another place. Yep, there's a few cases where it's okay, but if you give the head honcho a statue, it's probably not a good idea. Get above himself. And so these are all over the place, and we know we've been fighting about them for a decade at least. This is, I don't know the date on it, but it's surely a late 19th or early 20th century statue, and it is basically an artifact of the days when the South finally won the Civil War and did all the stuff they wanted to do except without chattel slavery. And it's put up to be pleased about that. Who knows if they cared about General Lee at all. I mean, that's what it's for. So taking it down is a statement about that, without it being a statement about General Lee at all. But again, that's not really what I came here to talk about, and I certainly didn't come here to tell you what black people in Charlottesville think when they walk by it. I have no idea. Not any personal idea that I could get any better than you. What I put it up for is because we are frequently told that if we take down that statue or alter the monument to Confederate prisoners of war who died in Indianapolis or a couple thousand of the things around, that we'll forget history. And I'm fairly sure that nobody says that unless what they mean is we'll interpret history differently from the way that I like it and maybe insult my great-grandfather. But I just thought we should think about that. And this is the thing I feel qualified to talk about. How do we remember the past? We do occasionally look at statues. We might even sometimes recognize who they are and pay attention to them. I mean, maybe. I'm interested in them. But consider the possibility that with this statue gone, people will have forgotten the Civil War, even the Southern perspective on the Civil War. Can we have number 5? This is a screenshot of the Google search of movies about the Civil War. as many as would fit. Can we have number 6? This is the screenshot of books about the Civil War, first page, not the whole page. If you go to Ford's Theater, and then you go across the street to the visitor center, it's 3 stories tall, and they have a spiral staircase, and in the middle is a column of books written about Lincoln. Like, in real space. 4 or 5 across, all the way up and down. And that's just about Lincoln. Of course, the other side wrote them too, and so have all the sides, right? Nobody's gonna forget. Now, there are occasions where people do destroy memory, and they destroy it on purpose. So in 1888, slacker Brazil finally abolished slavery. Last Western country with legal chattel slavery, race-based slavery. And burnt all the records existing, at least at the federal government level of Brazil. And the official story was so that everybody could be equal and nobody could know who'd been a slave. Of course, you could tell by looking, but they didn't quite say that. And the effects are, we can't study Brazilian slavery nearly as well as we can in the United States. There's no role, well, there is a Casa Grande, there are some books about Brazilian slavery, but they didn't have the same kind of records that you have in the United States. And this for the country that received better than 40% of all the slaves ever trafficked across the ocean in the Atlantic slave trade. Tremendous, it's 10 times as many as came to the United States. As were brought, I should probably say. So you can go destroying memory, book burnings and blowing up archives and refusing to tell people things. I was saying to Ruth and Leo over breakfast this morning that one of the crazier genres on YouTube these days is that somebody from any side puts up a clip and says, shockingly racist Disney cartoon. And it's usually an accurate description. And you can plug in other things other than Disney cartoon. And then half the comments are about how the crazy people are censoring this so that you can't see it and we're going to forget. It's just a bizarre thing to put as a comment on the video of it. But it does happen, and people do forget. In fact, it's necessary to forget some things, because if we remembered all the details, we'd never get anywhere. We'd get bogged down in the details. But will the Civil War be forgotten? Let's look at number 7. You could all go home and read about it in Harper's Weekly magazine from now till Christmas. You could read about it for the next 5 years in real time with weekly magazines for free. And then when you're done with that, you could start again and read it in Frank Leslie's, the other illustrated magazine at the time. You could go and read it in the Illustrated London News. You could go to the Library of Congress and read about it in every newspaper that was published in the 19th century, and then you could read about it in all the Australian newspapers as well, because they have the world's best newspaper interface online for free. This stuff is not going to be forgotten in any sort of global sense. And as long as people talk about it, it'll be remembered. And if there are statues and people don't talk about it, it'll be forgotten. How many people remember the name of the heroic Santa Claus who saved a bunch of people in the great department store fire of downtown Terre Haute of about 1950 or something? But there's a monument. There really is. It's between the courthouse and the city hall. He died in the process. It used to be on Wabash, sort of where the store was, I imagine. Yeah. And for one reason or another, it's moved and we've forgotten about it. So there are things that we remember, there are things that we forget, and I think we get to decide which they are. And we certainly get to decide which things we celebrate. Let's have the next one, John. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. Anybody ever flown out of Atlanta and seen that you can see the Confederate generals from the window of the plane? Is this a memory? Is this a reminder? I mean, it's not just that, right? This is a celebration. You wouldn't do that of people you didn't like. They do not have one of General Sherman on the other side. My kind of Bostonian roots mean that every time somebody says we have to preserve memory, I think, aha, okay. Let's get a bunch of reenactors and have them walk through Georgia and sing how they beat a thoroughfare for freedom, entered train, and treason fled before them. You've been nice to me, so I won't actually try to sing Marching Through Georgia to you, but It is tempting at times. And the thing is, I think that it would be a crappy idea. I mean, I don't think, for one thing, the North has no call to go and say that the South was bad. I talked about this earlier. It's not worth the trouble to use it to poke each other's eyes out today, right? And they wouldn't like it, and frankly, I didn't know the words to the song until I was about 40. It's not like in the North we're constantly refighting the Civil War. I mean, other things to fight about. I mean, I would love to see the day where they charged $100 a chance to get to pull the handle on the dynamite. We have the next one. It's been done before. Lovely sequence of blowing the swastika off the Nuremberg Grandstand just after the Second World War. And thinking of memories, it's amazing the stuff you learn when you start poking around. So this grandstand is still there. The field where the Nazis assembled is a park. The grandstand has been essentially left to decay as a symbol of decay. They don't quite want to take it down. They do not want to fix it up. They definitely don't want to use it for anything because its purposes are so linked with evil politics. And they use the Olympic Stadium as buildings that have uses, right? They're actually, just in the last few years, started to spend a whole bunch of money to preserve it in its then current state of decay as a kind of reminder. I mean, Germany's a rich country. They can do this. I don't know if it's a good idea or not, but it's theirs, right? I actually wanted a picture of the Reichstag with Nazi flags in front of it, but there aren't any, because by the time Hitler had taken over and made that the flag of Germany, the Reichstag had been burnt down. But I mean, that's the same thing you do if you put a Confederate flag over the state capitol, right? It's just saying, if we don't do that, we'll forget. And there are other ways to remember. John? Like, similar thing, books about Nazis. They go on, of course. And that's without even saying books about the Second World War, books about the Holocaust, books about all the victims that could be found. And there are also little ways to remember people. John, if we could have the next one. These happen to be in Norway, but they're all over Western Europe. And these are the people. Harbo de Sara Karman. Here lived Sarah Karman, born in London, birth year 1888, deported 1942, died in Auschwitz on the 12th of January 1942. And Anna, her daughter, daughter-in-law. I mean, those are reminders, right? And they literally stick them in the sidewalk and call them stumbling blocks. They're just there as evidence that you can remember without celebrating. Or perhaps they're celebrating those people. And actually in a way that if you ignore them are like anything else, and if you stop and look at them is terrifically sad as it should be. That's a way to remember. So, I don't know, maybe nobody needed any convincing. I hope I've assembled a little bit of evidence that we can remember things without celebrating them. And I have told people, I have told students, I've told people who didn't agree with me, I've told people who did agree with me, that you probably don't want me on the statue committee. I am probably voting against all the statues. Not to take out all the ones that are there, but I think if you asked me who we should put the statue of, I would probably suggest an abstract figure, and even then not suggest making them a hero. Because even the heroes aren't always, which doesn't mean there aren't ones I like, but I would be very leery of saying this person who was great in this way was lousy in this way, and sort of ignoring the other. None of the statues of Winston Churchill are happy that he probably helped cause the Great Bengal Famine, for example, and various. None of the statues of Roosevelt are put up by white supremacists, but they sort of could be, et cetera, et cetera. Mr. Roosevelt, not Mrs. Roosevelt, she's a lot better. And, you know, there's a lot of things to celebrate there, right? But people are complex. I think one of the things that as a history professor I spend lots of time doing is reminding students that people are complex. Persons individually are complex, multidimensional. but then also that societies are complex. And that the further back it is, the more I think we, even the professionals, are likely to imagine that everybody in a given time and place thought the same thing, understood the religion and the laws equally well, believed them and followed them equally well, when you merely have to look around to any time you choose to remember living in and see that this is clearly not the case, right? I'm not sure if there's such a thing as a bad Unitarian, but if there were, they would exist. They were around, right? And so just partly, the past is a mess. It's like a bowl of spaghetti or a kite that was packed up too fast at the end of the last season. There's a whole bunch of untangling and unwinding and figuring out what to actually look at and keep. And at some point, you don't want to make it over for today. But at some point, actually, that's what happens, which is why people keep writing books about the Civil War, because there's a different book to write about the Civil War after the Second World War than there was before it. People care about different stuff after the Civil Rights Movement than before it, right? So there's that. But now let's look at a few memorials, actual monuments, that I want to think about as monuments. We can take number 12, John. Thank you. When I was a kid, the one in front was there and the one in back wasn't there. And what was there instead of the one in back was the most horrifying intersection that I've ever had to drive through in my life. 4 lanes of traffic crossing 4 lanes of traffic 100 feet above a river in 300 yards at tops, maybe 300 feet. But this is not the point. The point is, look, isn't it nice? The bridge, which you can't quite tell, but the bridge matches the monument. This is the monument to Bunker Hill, to the Battle of Bunker Hill, the second battle of the American Revolution, more or less. Built on top of a little hill that then became a kind of a townhouse neighborhood, kind of ritzy, and then became this kind of Irish working class neighborhood. And at the top is this big monument, which you can imagine the Irish people love. Irish people in Boston, in my experience as a kid, love Revolutionary War stories because the English always lose. And whatever jokes anybody makes about Boston, I mean, one of the great truths, probably a little diluted now, is that the English always need to lose. And when I was a kid, they still collected for the IRA and the bars, And so it looks like this clever thing, and it kind of is, and it echoes this story of the landscape. Ooh, the name of that bridge pissed people off. It made some of them so angry. This is called the Leonard Zarkim Memorial Bridge. Leonard Zarkim was a school integration activist in the 1970s. And Charlestown, of all the neighborhoods of incredibly parochial, subdivided Boston, where one neighborhood to another could be a mixed marriage, was one of the two that was the strongest in favor of all-white neighborhood high schools even. And so plunk down across Charlestown a bridge, name it after the desegregation activist, and half the people in the neighborhood, give or take, know that you're poking them in the face. And the other half think, actually that's pretty good. Yeah, we've sort of overcome that. Bunch of nonsense, really. Hardly anybody white goes to public school in Boston anymore. My experience of public schools in Boston are part of my reaction to Catholic schools, however good or innocent they may be. Anybody I know who's not Catholic who sends their kids to St. Pat's, I immediately think of how the Catholic schools of Boston were the way for white people to live in the city and not have to send their kids to school with black people for 30 years. So it's probably unfair on other Catholic schools, but that's what happened there. So look at that. You could use a memorial to say, we are better than the city of the 70s. These great things have happened. You could also use it to say, and that neighborhood is out. Those were bad people, and I'm not exactly sure totally what happened. Let's see another in the same vein. I'm sorry I'm talking so much about Boston, that's what I know about. Number 13, the Christopher Columbus Waterfront Park. Lovely place to play when I was a kid. They had something that I later realized was a Santa Maria playground. And you can see the little statue of Columbus up there. funny to put up statues of Columbus because nobody knows what he looked like, but there's plenty of them. They're all the same, and I hope this one doesn't have a telescope because it really bothers me when they give them a telescope. They weren't invented for another 150 years. So this was basically an old fish pier turned into this park. And I think everybody agrees it's a good place for a park. And why is it called the Christopher Columbus Park? He didn't go to Boston. It's because up there on those hills where Paul Revere lived became the core Italian neighborhood. Well, and also across the harbor is the other one. And so they wanted to have a Christopher Columbus something, and the Knights of Columbus paid for it. And so one of the in the tangled history of Columbus Day, one of the things is that it was a way of admitting that Italians were people and were important to the United States, which is a complication if anybody says, yeah, should we really celebrate the whole thing? Yeah, we know we're heirs of this. We know we stand on the land of the Miami and the Kickapoo and so on, but is that really something to totally celebrate, or should we maybe step back? Italian-American groups get angry. I mean, it explains Mayor de Blasio and Columbus this and Columbus that and so on. So that's another one. Let's see a few more. Boston, executed for being a Quaker in front of the state capitol, so it's sort of, we're sorry. There's actually quite a bit of we're sorry in the state capitol. One of the Salem witch judges repenting, the royal governor being arrested, but there's also a big statue of John Eliot preaching to the local native people because it was so good that he converted them to Christianity, which probably should have a curtain hung in front of it in a secular government, but it's there in the House of Representatives. I used to be a tour guide there when I was in high school. But next we have Frederick Douglass, totally unproblematic, it's a pretty good likeness, a good statue of somebody who was, a publisher, an ambassador, and so on. And I mean, maybe it'd be good to show him with his ship's caulker's mallet, but you can't have everything on the one statue. And then I just threw in this one for fun because has anybody ever heard of Samuel Plimsoll? Probably not. But have you heard of plimsolls? There's an old British word for like Keds or Converse type sneakers with a little line around it. So Samuel Plimsoll, there's monuments to him all in all the ports of England, was a member of Parliament who noticed that in the transition from wooden to steel sailing ships and steamers, that owners were converting their ships into liquid assets by insuring them and overloading them, and either they would make a lot of money when they got across the ocean, or they would get the insurance money. Plimsoll's innovation was to have the government come up with a formula for the correct maximum weight, and then to paint this line that you can see there carved on his monument, the line in the circle, on the side of the ship. So all over England are statues of this. And it's okay, I have no idea what he was like in any other context, but I think a monument to Mr. Plimsoll is probably a good thing. In fact, in Bristol, where they have all these things named after a big slave trader, he's one of the candidates for naming some of them after instead. Still a gray-haired white guy with a beard, but better, right? So you can do things with these monuments. And then we're going to wrap up here. It's going to be a little longer than it should be, but I'm sorry. Number 15. Yeah, that's where I first went to church. It's not Theodore Parker's church. Theodore Parker's church is 3 miles up the road. But this place is called The Monument. You go to Jamaica, if you put church, The Monument, Jamaica Plain, you get this. It's the name of the bus stop. It was the name of the trolley stop when I was a kid. It's how you told people how to get to the church, Center Street at the Monument. And you can tell it's a Civil War monument. You can partly tell it's a Civil War monument because the statue on top was probably, if it wasn't bought from a catalog, it was like ones that were bought from catalogs. There was a whole industry of more expensive bronze, like that one, or cheaper zinc statues of northern and southern soldiers. Just like we have downtown, you could order an artilleryman, a sailor, a cavalryman, an infantryman, an officer, a sergeant, and different sizes, different medals after the war. And this is one, and I went by this on the bus to school every day for 13 years. And I don't know, I never thought much about what it was like. It paid more attention to what the signs in front of the church says when eventually I went there. But that's been sitting there since like 1867 or something, whenever they got the money together, reminding people of the Civil War on my way to school. If we went 3 miles up the road, we'd come to Theodore Parker's church, where he, in the process of hiding fugitive slaves, said that he had often preached a sermon with a loaded musket in the pulpit with a cap upon the nipple, which is sort of equivalent to saying fully loaded for a muzzle loader. A real activist there. And if we went 3 miles the other direction and go downtown again, let's see number 16. So this is maybe a good Civil War monument. It's to the one of the Massachusetts, what they called the colored infantry regiments. It might be a little problematic, maybe a lot problematic, that the one guy in front on the horse that you can actually see who has a name is the colonel, the white colonel, Robert Gould Shaw. But the Shaws were trying. The Shaws said, leave him in the ground next to the troops, don't bring him home, that's where he belongs, that's where he wanted to be. But you could still look at that and say, was that, if that's the best we can do, we're not really memorializing the right people. Next one. See, we're ending with the final exam. It's not a hard question to say, if we have a statue in New Orleans that celebrates the restoration of white supremacy, is it okay to throw it in the river? I mean, maybe you have feelings about decorum, maybe some of you disagree with me, but I have no problem saying, yeah, that statue should probably either go or have a great big other one next to it, right? This is harder, because this is a monument to emancipation. It's kind of behind the Supreme Court. It's up on Capitol Hill, a few blocks away. And it was paid for pretty much entirely by freed people, and controlled almost entirely by one particular committee of white abolitionists. And the sculpture was chosen from a sculptor in New York who'd already made it. No, it wasn't really commissioned. They did change the face to the face of this actual guy, Archer Alexander over here. It's a National Park Service website useful for this kind of stuff. So it's a person. That's good. There's 2 real people there. Frederick Douglass spoke when it was unveiled. And he said good things about it and bad things about it. And he said good things about Abraham Lincoln and bad things about Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was not particularly unracist for most of his life, and maybe he got better, and Frederick Douglass said that. And this statue might show a strong, well-muscled African-American man about to spring up and take a place in society, which was the optimistic interpretation that people put on it. Or it might show a sort of degraded, naked individual who's there, sort of cowering in gratitude to the great Lincoln. People have been arguing about it for 125 plus 21, 146 years now. And it's on the list of statues that large numbers of people would like to have taken away or put someplace else. And that was trying to be good, right? So this is why I said this is the final exam question. This is the hard question. And there's one more, just one more. In 1974, so the statue is just a tad older than I am. It's just a few months older than me. No, a few months younger than I am. This was installed facing the Emancipation statue across a little plaza, the writer and poet Mary McLeod Bethune. And Frederick Douglass had said, I hope that soon they will add a statue of a black man standing tall. He probably didn't say black man. Well, he might have. I don't remember exactly what he said. Standing, tall and free as part of society. And this was kind of the answer. But there is currently this debate going on. Do we take out the old one, put it in a museum? Since it belongs to the federal government and it's in Washington, D.C., they would send it to Mars, which is the big warehouse where they keep the leftover statues. It's out in Maryland someplace. Or do we keep adding around it, right? And therein lies the debate, and the debate will partly be about what we remember, what the monuments mean, and how we remember those things as we go. And hopefully we remember that the monuments are always working for the people who put them up and the people who have to look at them, and not necessarily for some sort of sacred memory of the past.
Thank you, Sam. One of the lessons of history that words are windows to your thoughts. The study of language is the study of history. And if you read modern stuff, it is tinted by our perceptions of how things may have been. If you read things from the past, then they are certainly tinted by their perceptions. So you really have to be careful. Today's closing hymn is number 159. This is my song.
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and wide. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too, and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, thou God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
We're going to read number 579, The Limits of Tyrants. The Limits of Tyrants. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing up the ground.
They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its waters.
This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle.
Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will.
Find out what people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them.
The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress.
Frederick Douglass.
May the blessings of love rest upon you. May peace abide with you. May God's presence illuminate your heart now and forevermore.
Go in peace, know that you are loved, and that your life is sacred.